Hi, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's book-to-show comparison for the Expanse Season 3, Episode 10, Dandelion Sky. This video is part of a series of videos where I compare the Expanse TV show to that of its source material, pointing out the differences and giving my opinion on how well I think these adaptations work. So I have to start with a spoiler warning for The Expanse up to the end of Season 3. If you haven't seen up to this point, you may not want to watch this video, otherwise some things may be spoiled for you. However, if you haven't seen past Season 3, not to worry, this video will not contain future spoilers from the books beyond Season 3. So our episode begins on the Rosinante with Amos and Alex watching a message from Holden that he had left for them, where he tells them he went to the station in the middle on Miller's suggestion. And this is something he felt he needed to do on his own. He thanks Alex and Amos for everything, but tells them not to follow him and says it's an order. So in the novels, Holden doesn't leave without telling anyone. He leaves Naomi in command, who knows full well what Holden is doing and why. He somehow doesn't need to tell others not to follow him. They know to follow orders, and that means staying on the Rossi. But this certainly works for what the show has established. Moreover, it portrays the crew as more close, as it's quite touching the way Holden says thanks to Alex and Amos for everything. It's him acknowledging all that they've done for him and all that they've been through together, and the fact that they're so worried about him after hearing this recording shows how much in turn they care about him. So it's quite powerful, so I'm going to give this a +3. So then we go over to the Thomas Prince, where we see them preparing to go through the ring. An officer approaches Pastor Anna and asks if she's a Baptist, and she admits that she is, and he says he also is a Baptist, and tells her a little bit about himself. Pastor Anna tries to be polite, but really her attention is elsewhere, as she can barely contain her excitement about going through the ring. The officer, whose name is Lieutenant Nemiroff, talks about how he has trouble sleeping. Anna remarks that it seems somewhat disrespectful, but Nemiroff corrects her, saying that he's simply terrified. Anna then excuses herself to watch the monitor as the Thomas Prince enters the ring. Once inside, she and Kavord examine the monitor and remark on everything they can see now inside the ring, including the station in the middle, the missiles, and the belter ship that are floating helplessly towards the station. Anna speculates that the purple haze around the objects floating is similar to like a cyst that bodies build around foreign objects to protect itself, but Kavord isn't so sure that biological applications apply here, as this place is so strange. Kavord remarks that this is a place where angels fear to tread, that's for sure, and this really freaks out Lieutenant Nemiroff, but Anna's too engrossed with the screen to notice. So this is quite different than the novels. Lieutenant Nemiroff appears to be a stand-in for the character of Chris Williams, who is also a Baptist that approaches Pastor Anna, but he asks her if she's willing to do services on the Thomas Prince, and she is. So she begins conducting services, and this is before the Thomas Prince enters the ring. Chris also expresses anxiety over the mission, but Anna seems more sympathetic to him and less concerned about exploring the ring like her show counterpart is. So I do know what this scene is setting up for, so I understand why they changed Anna's character in the show to be more obsessed with exploring the ring, and I think it creates an interesting character arc, so I'm going to give this a +1. We then see Naomi on her skiff trying to hail the Rosinante repeatedly, but to no avail, and she's perplexed on why they won't answer her. She's then contacted by the MCRN ship, the Susan, that asks her what her business is, and she says that she's en route to the Rosinante. The Martian officer says they're in the middle of a policing action, and that her assistance is neither requested nor required, and she asks them if they really believe that the same James Holden who saved Mars is really responsible for destroying a civilian ship. The Martian replies by saying that they order her to break off and that she's been warned. She simply says, "Same to you," and then they break off communications, and she adds, "asshole." So, in the novels, Naomi never leaves the Rocinante, so never has to fly back to it. Further, at this stage, the Rocinante has fixed its communication, so it tells the Martians themselves that they're innocent. However, they detect that Holden is going towards the station in a spacesuit, so they talk to Naomi, order Holden to turn around, but she is equally as defiant as your show counterpart. It is a bit frustrating to me that the Rocinante doesn't have its comms fixed yet, as it did in the novels, but ultimately I think it's fine and this works well for what the show established, so I'm going to give this a 0. So we then go over to the MCRN dropship that the Susan has sent to chase after Holden to see a group of four Martian Marines that include Bobby Draper. Draper guesses that the man that they're chasing is Holden, as flying solo to the station is his style. When the other Martians note that he's crazy, Draper says you could make that argument, but he didn't destroy the Sun Un, as that definitely is not his style. Draper's CO, Lieutenant Mayer, then asks Draper if she's up to his mission, as she served with Holden before, but she says that she'll do her duty and follow orders. So in the novels, Bobby Draper isn't in the ring. She isn't in Book 3 at all. In fact, while Holden is flying towards the station, he remarks to Naomi that maybe one of the Martian Marines following him is Bobby Draper, but Naomi says don't count on it, that these Marines are much more meaner. Which is true in the books, but in the show, Draper is indeed amongst them. And although this requires a lot more serendipity for the one Martian Marine that knows Holden just happening to be one of the few Marines that are chasing him, I do think it adds a lot to the story, as once again Draper has to tread the line between her loyalties, which is always interesting, so I'm going to give this a +1. So then we go over to Holden floating alone towards the station as he talks to Miller, that appears to be just standing next to him as Holden floats. Miller talks about how there's no such thing as free will, and he's just destined to do what he does, which is why he's always involved in important historic events. Holden asks Miller to explain what the station is, but Miller says once he gets there, they'll both know. Miller also tells Holden that he calmed the security around the station, otherwise he'd be squashed like a bug. Holden does not find that comforting. Miller then points to the Martian skiff that's following and says that he's just making all kinds of friends. When Holden sees that the Martians, he speeds up to travel faster, but Miller tells him to remember what he said about doors and corners, but Holden just tells him to cut out the cop talk. Miller then tells him that he's no good to him, dead, and yells at him to slow down. Holden does and remarks that he was just exercising some free will. But Miller says that no, he's just being an asshole. So in the novels, Holden doesn't talk to Miller on the way to the station. He talks to Naomi through the radio, and Naomi is the one who warns him about the Martians following him. In fact, I'm starting to notice that Holden talks to Miller a lot less in the novels than he does in the show, and it makes sense that he talked to him more, as if they're going to get Thomas Jane to come back, they might as well use him. Plus, I think these Holden Miller scenes add a lot to the story, so I'm going to give this a +2. So we then go back to the Rocinante, where Alex alerts Amos to the fact that the Martians sent a skiff after Holden. Amos says that they need to go after them, but Alex says that they won't be able to catch them before they get to Holden. So Amos says what they need to do is get out there and punch them in the face, but Alex sarcastically tells Amos that attacking a well-armed squadron of Martian Marines is a great idea. He then asks Amos why he isn't more freaked out, as clearly Alex is, but Amos said that he hasn't felt fear since he was 5 years old, and Alex remarks that he wished he didn't feel fear, but Amos says, no, you don't. Alex then asks, what if this is the end of humanity? Amos then tells the story of a woman he knew from Baltimore who said that if the end of the world ever came, she'd take her 2 cats to the roof and jump. Amos then tells Alex not to worry, that Amos would take Alex with him too. This doesn't seem to comfort Alex. So in the novels, we never got a conversation like this between Alex and Amos, as Naomi was still on board the Rocinante at this stage, and although it is possible Alex was scared, he didn't show it, and he hid it under a air of professionalism, and they all just focused on their jobs. Also at this stage, there wasn't a viewpoint character on the Rocinante, so what little we got from it came from Naomi communicating with Holden or Bull. But I quite like this. It's a fun little scene that humanizes and fleshes out Alex and Amos more than they were in the books, so I'm going to give this a +2. So then we go over to the Behemoth, where Drummer and Ashford are in Command Center, and Drummer talks about getting to the station before the inners do, and Ashford asks what they're going to do once they're there, knock politely, or maybe rub it with a cloth. He then remarks on how much of shame it is that their chief engineer isn't here to build them some probes. Drummer then asks Ashford if he has something to say, but he says that he already said it, that Drummer never should have let Naomi leave. Drummer remarks that this isn't a slave ship, and Ashford retorts that it's a warship. And Drummer then remarks that she's the captain. So there's obvious tension between the two that starts to garner the attention of those around them, including Diago and Grigori. Drummer then says there's some farming equipment that the Mormons left behind that can be converted into probes, and she'll go do that. When Ashford was surprised she knew that, Drummer says a captain must know her ship, which clearly irritates Ashford. So in the novels, there wasn't a precise conversation like this, as they never lost their chief engineer, but there were some power struggles between Ashford and Bull, where Bull tried to politely point out when Ashford made a mistake, and Ashford took this as an affront to his authority. The scene that's probably most similar is when Ashford called Bull to the command center to ask him how soon he could have a security team ready to go to the station, and Bull's response was to ask how long does it take to get to Tycho Station. That response only angered Ashford, who dressed Bull down and told him if Earth and Mars were sending Marines to the station, he wanted the belt to as well. In the novels, the UN also sent a skiff of Marines to the station, but their skiff went too fast trying to pass the Martians, and they got stopped by the speed limit, so they likely all got killed. In any event, Bull had to slowly explain to Ashford that they simply didn't have the equipment nor the training to come anywhere near close to competing with Earth and Mars in this regard, so any men he sent would very likely die, so he refused to send men to their deaths. This annoyed Ashford, but he didn't call Bull on this, so he let the matter drop. Both conflicts work for their respective mediums. The show's version has an added benefit of building the existing conflict between the two different factions of the OPA, and the added element of Naomi's departure, so I'm going to give this a +1. We then go back to the Martian skiff, where Lieutenant Mayer tries to unsuccessfully communicate with Holden to warn him to turn around, but Bobby Draper then asks permission to try herself, and Mayer grants it. Draper then calls Holden, and he replies surprised to hear her voice, but he then says, "Shut the fuck up," but then he apologizes to Bobby, saying that he wasn't talking to her. She asks if he's on another channel, and he says no, but then he says yes, and the Marines all look concerned as Holden doesn't sound right. He continues to mutter as we, the audience, can recognize that he's talking to Miller, but Bobby and the Marines are just confused. He mutters something about monkeys and microwaves, as if he's repeating something Miller said. Bobby then tells Holden to slow down and reverse course, but he says that he can't do that, and he tells her to trust him and to turn around, and then cuts the channel. Mayer asks Bobby if Holden sounds in his right mind, and Draper says no, and Mayer concurs that everyone has a breaking point, and Holden has clearly reached his. So in the novels, as I already mentioned, Bobby Draper wasn't there, but further, these Marines actually seemed a lot more reasonable than the ones in the novels, who didn't even try to reason with Holden, they just shot him. It's not just more reasonable, but it's also they seem more human and realistic, where the Marines in the novels felt like Marine stereotypes. This, of course, is helped by having a familiar character present with the Marines. It helps put a face on them. Also in the novels, we do get a line about monkeys and microwaves, as Holden muses that the way humans are reacting to the ring and all of its technology is like monkeys discovering a microwave. They know if they press a button, a light will turn on. If they press another button, something will get hot. But no monkey really knows how to heat up a burrito. The show obviously changes so that Miller is the one saying it, but in the novels, Miller does say it later, but he's actually referencing something that Holden thought of earlier, so it proves to Holden that he can read his thoughts or can know what he's thinking. So I will say I wasn't a huge fan of the cliche of someone talking to someone who isn't there and other people hearing that and thinking that he's crazy. It's something we've seen a lot in film and television, but it does kind of work here. And I do really like this scene, so I'm going to give this a +3. So then we see Holden slow down as he approaches the station. When he gets too close to the station, part of it opens up to reveal a corridor beneath. Holden stops and asks Miller what he wants him to do. Miller cryptically says that there's a record room that they need to find, and they need to read the records and see what's what. Holden then tells Miller that he's not going in there until he tells him exactly what's in there. Miller then seems to struggle and says that sometimes he knows stuff that's too big for his head. He then says that there used to be a lot of something here. He struggles to find the right word, and he comes up with civilization, saying that there used to be a civilization here billions of years ago, but now all there is a bunch of locked doors and some lights and a timer. So Holden asks what do they do, and Miller answers they figure out how to pick the locks. Miller points to the Marines and says that he better hurry up before his friends get here. Holden asks if Miller can just stop them, and Miller says sure, he can get the station to stop them permanently. So Holden says no. So Miller then suddenly appears in front of him in the corridor and says, well, you better get moving then. So Holden descends into the corridor of the station. So in the novels, Miller doesn't appear to Holden until after he enters the station. Holden goes to land on the station, and instead it opens up to let him inside. Alex calls him to see if he's okay, and he describes it as the station swallowing Holden. He says that he's fine, so Alex cuts the channel, and that's when Miller appears. So many of the lines Miller says here are taken directly from the book, such as stuff being too big for his head and there being locked doors, and also how he struggled to find the word civilization. But they were all spoken at different times, sometimes in a different context. Also in the novels, when Holden asks Miller if he can stop the Marines, and he says that he could, but there'd be consequences, and that sounds a bit ominous to Holden. In the novels, Miller never asked Holden to go to the station. When he gets there, Miller says, you shouldn't have come. Holden is confused as he thought Miller wanted him to come here, which is why he got Julie Mao to set the whole thing up. Miller is confused by him saying that and says that Julie and Miller are dead. But then Miller does well, now that you're here, you might as well help me read these records sort of thing. So in the novels, it seems a bit convenient that Holden just happens to end up in the place Miller needs him to be because he drew the wrong conclusion. And it doesn't make much sense to me why Miller told him that he shouldn't have come when clearly he wants him to be there so he can help him read the records, which is what he asked Holden to do as soon as he gets there. So it makes a lot more sense to me for Miller to be the one to tell him to go to the station in the first place, and that he'd be pushing a reluctant Holden to go forward. So I'm going to give this a +3. So then we go over to the Thomas Prince, where we see Lieutenant Nemiroff wandering through the corridors looking really numb to the world. He goes into his quarters and stares at his screen showing the display of the space inside the ring, and he looks terrified. He then gets a look of determination on his face. He raises his gun, puts it in his mouth, and pulls the trigger. Later, when Anna and Kavord are walking through the corridors discussing science and religion, an officer approaches Anna and asks her if she could perform the services for an officer who died, as they are of the same faith. Anna agrees to this and asks who the officer was, so the officer sends information to her hand terminal that has a picture of Lieutenant Nemirov, whom she instantly recognizes. The officer says he died when cleaning his sidearm and leaves. Kavord says that that's terrible, but Anna says it's a terrible euphemism, actually, then excuses herself, as clearly she understands that it was a suicide. Now, I explained earlier that Lieutenant Nemirov is kind of a stand-in for Chris in the novels, but Chris never committed suicide. Instead, the storyline just led to Anna doing some services for Chris and some of the other crew members. In my opinion, the story was rather dull and not very interesting, and only came into play later in the story on the Behemoth when Anna's flock helped her out in the struggle against Ashford. But for the most part, I thought the scenes with her and Chris were rather boring, so seeing them do something a lot more powerful that portrays the power of the fear of being inside the ring, coupled with a character arc for Anna as she let her fascination of the ring blind her to the suffering of those around her. This was quite powerful, so I'm going to give this a +5. So then we see Melba sulking about in the locker room watching some of the documentary footage of Holden when her hand terminal alerts her that the Rosinante has changed course. She asked it to show her the Rosinante's new course, and then she asks if she took a skiff, if she could intercept the Rosinante before the Martians do, and the hand terminal tells her it's not possible. She then asks if the Rosinante's core went critical, what the zero survival blast radius would be, and it shows a large area large enough to encompass the Martians, so it's clear her plan is to destroy the Rosinante, which would also destroy the Martians, thus erasing any evidence that proves Holden's innocence. Later, we see Melba in the corridor moving some panels around, preparing for her departure. She then calls a maintenance crew and asks for access to a mech suit to do some repairs, but the officer on the other end of the line says that her access level isn't high enough, so she cuts the connection. So in the novels, Melba has absolutely no idea how she's going to catch up to Holden. Apparently that thought of going in a skiff or mech suit isn't plausible to her. It isn't until after the disaster where all the ships are stopped by the slow zone that she sees an opportunity by stealing an injured man's access card that she comes up with a plan to go to the Rosinante. So all these scenes work fine, and they help contribute to how Melba's plans to carry out her plan to destroy Holden. So I'm going to give this a +1. So then we go over to the Behemoth, where we see Diago go up to Ashford and start a conversation. He tells Ashford that he doesn't like the way Drummer talks to him, and he says that Ashford says that she's the captain, she can talk to him however she likes, but Diago says that Ashford should be the captain, not Drummer. Ashford then tells him to tread carefully. Diago continues that Ashford has much more experience and has been captaining ships before Drummer was born. Ashford agrees and adds that he drank whiskey from a UN ship before scuttling it and has flown past Martian warships unnoticed, has seen friends die in the vacuum of space, and has watched his only son burn, so that when he tells him to tread carefully, he would do well to stop talking. So in the novels this never happened, but the closest equivalent would be just before they go into the ring. After Bull fails to talk Ashford out of it, he finds Michio Pa in a bar and talks to her and how going into the ring is a bad idea. But she dodges the topic, just saying only that she will follow orders. But Bull then says if she were the captain, then she could give the orders. Pa scolds him for such talk and specifically orders him not to take any action against Ashford. So these scenes are similar as they accomplish the same thing, but they have different implications. The implication with Diago and Ashford implies that Diago is wrong to ask, and the implication with Pa and Bull is that Bull is right, Ashford doesn't deserve to be the captain. But either way, it works for their respective mediums, so I'm going to give this a 0. So next we go over to Holden, who's traveling through the station and asks Miller if it's a machine. Miller tells Holden that he needs to help him get the system back online. Holden wonders what he can do that Miller can't because he's plugged into the system. Miller says that it's locked, remember, so he needs someone to turn the key. Holden asks why he needs him to do it, and Miller admits it's because he exists. Holden notes that Miller looks real enough to him, and Miller explains that his mind is like a keyboard, and if he pushes the right buttons, boom, Miller appears. Holden proposes that maybe Holden is the illusion in Miller's head, and Miller tells him to just slow down as he's just trying to keep things simple for him, as he's calculus and Holden's an amoeba. He's Mozart and Holden's a monkey. So this is pretty much how it was described in the books as well. However, the book went into a little more detail on how Miller appearing to Holden, but I don't think it was needed, as this explains the gist of it just fine. Although Miller never tells Holden he needs him because he exists, but Holden does ask Miller why he can't just access the systems remotely, and Miller replies that he doesn't have the access codes. Holden says that he doesn't have the access codes either, but Miller points out that he doesn't need to because he's there, so they don't have to access it remotely. Either way, I think both scenes work, so I'm going to give this a 0. So then we go to the Thomas Prince, where Tilly starts a conversation with Anna about the first officer, how he keeps trying to limit their access, and she complains that she didn't know that blackmail would be this tedious. But Anna looks upset and preoccupied, so Tilly facetiously asks who died, and Anna looks more grim, so Tilly realizes that someone actually did die. Anna tells her about Lieutenant Nemiroff and how he was asking for help, but she ignored him because she was too distracted. Tilly tells her it's understandable as it's a pretty significant distraction, but Anna says that she isn't a scientist, she's a minister, and her job is to comfort people in need, and she should have been doing her job. So this is a great story arc that I love. I actually think it's more interesting than the books, where Anna was just doing her job and she was less concerned about scientific issues and more concerned about keeping everyone calm and helping them find comfort. In one of her services, the men and women there start expressing anger. They call Martians dusters and they call belters skinnies, and Anna calls them out on this, saying that using hateful terms like that is just a way to dehumanize people to make them easier to kill. And she tries to convey that they all need to work together in order to survive, and that message does break through. And as much as I like that, I think the show's version is much more interesting, as it's more powerful and has a nice character arc for Anna, so I'm going to give this a +2. So we then see Anna giving a sermon at Jordan Nemiroff's memorial service, where she says that she wished that she knew Jordan better, and then recounts when he asked her if God wanted them out there, and she said that she didn't know the answer, and she still doesn't know the answer, but what she thinks God wants is for them to look out for one another and to care for those in need. And she says it will increase their joy and diminish their pain and will honor Jordan. So it was a touching service that the people there appreciated. They all shake hands with Anna before leaving, but Anna is surprised to see that Tilly was also in attendance. Tilly approaches her and tells her that she saw a woman she recognized as Clarissa Mao on the ship disguised as a tech. Tilly and Anna both have sympathy for the Mao family, whose lives were destroyed because of the actions of one man. Tilly says that she didn't want to tell security because that would add to her problems, and she wants to help her. Anna tells Tilly to go to her and offer her help. She also tells Tilly to trust her own judgment, and Tilly jokingly tells her that she obviously doesn't know her very well. So in the novels, the memorial service is probably closest to a sermon that she gives at one of her services, which at first was going to be about the importance of duty, but she changed it to be about the importance of love and taking care of one another, which she thought was a more important message to spread at the moment. As far as Tilly goes, going to Anna about seeing Clarissa Mal, that didn't happen in the novels. In the novels, Tilly never encountered Clarissa on the Thomas Prince. Instead, Tilly first recognizes Clarissa after they've all been evacuated to the Behemoth, where someone shows her the image Cohen sculpted and claimed that it's Julie Mal. But Tilly, having known the family since they were children, recognizes instantly that it is not Julie, it's Clarissa, and that that's when they realize that Clarissa is the one responsible. But by this time, she has already went to the Rosinante where the crew apprehended her, so there wasn't an issue of whether or not Tilly should go to security. But I think it works for what they established here, plus it's kind of cruel for Anna, as she's just making up for a mistake of ignoring a man in pain, and then she goes and gives Tilly advice that's going to get her killed, and the memorial service was much more powerful than a simple sermon that was in the novel, so I'm going to give this a +3. So then we go to Holden, who arrives at a room where he notes it feels like 1G. Miller says you're welcome and says that there's also atmosphere so he can take off his helmet, but Holden declines to do so. He then notices a pillar in the middle of the room that's incomplete with a space missing in between. Miller tells Holden to complete the circuit by sticking his hand in there. Holden asks how he can be sure that by doing that he's not going to kill everyone that he loves, and Miller says no risk, no reward. But Holden says that's not good enough, that he needs to know that it's actually Miller he's talking to and not some protomolecule thing that's manipulating him. So he asked Miller how he felt when he saw Julie transformed into the protomolecule. He assumed that she couldn't feel anything, but he could, so he asked him how it felt knowing that she would die. Did it tear him up inside? Miller says Julie's got nothing to do with this, but then Holden persists and Miller vanishes. Now, in the novels, Miller doesn't tell Holden about completing the circuit until after his encounter with the Martian Marines, which I'll get to shortly, and he doesn't seem to doubt Miller as much by this stage, although he is worried about what will happen to him when he does it, so he is a bit trepidatious, but he never challenges Miller to prove who he is by trying to provoke an emotional response out of him. And I found that aspect of it to really ramp up the tension. Plus, it made the scene so much more emotional, which is really punctuated by the excellent music in this scene. So I'm going to give this a +5. So then we go to the Behemoth, where Ashford goes to Drummer in a cargo bay as she's working on converting old farming equipment into a probe. Drummer explains how she wanted to be alone until her temper died down. Ashford then tries to relate to her, saying that he understood why she let Naomi go, and then talks about how he used to treat his friends when he served as captain, but Drummer seems upset by this, saying that he just can't help but give her advice, yet he challenged her authority in front of the crew. He admits that probably wasn't wise of him, but she insists that he meant to do what he did, and that she's sure that when she left, he had nothing but praise for her. That way, when the time comes for him to take over, it will seem like he had no choice. Ashford replies by saying they have a problem and they need to work it out. So there's really no equivalent in the novels. As here we kind of see both Drummer and Ashford positions. Neither one is right or wrong, and Ashford is clearly sincere in his desire to work out their differences. Whereas in the novels, Captain Ashford never seemed to have any desire to work with Pa or Bull, but rather to just exercise his power over them. And Bull has proven time and time again to be correct that Ashford is not deserving of the authority that he has. Now some may say that the dynamic in the show is more complex, as neither Drummer nor Ashford is in the right or the wrong, but I still actually much prefer the books versions, even if it's more simplistic, as it's also more fleshed out and personally more interesting, particularly knowing where they're going to take the story next, so I'm going to give this a -2. So then we go over to the Thomas Prince where Tilly finds Melba working on a control panel. Of course, what she's really doing is trying to break into a bay in order to steal a mech suit so she can go to the Rosnate to destroy it, but Tilly doesn't know any of this. Tilly calls her Clarissa, and when Clarissa denies it, Tilly remains insistent. She says that she wants to help her, that she can hire a lawyer, that she shouldn't have to suffer for what her father did or did not do, and Clarissa simply says that it wasn't her father's fault, it was Holden, and he has to pay. Tilly tells Clarissa that whatever happened, there's no reason for her to suffer for it, but Clarissa just laughs, and then we see her trigger the implants to flood her body with the combat drugs. So as I already mentioned in the novels, Tilly never confronts Clarissa like this. She does come and see her after she's been in prison on the Behemoth. In fact, Tilly is a big proponent in pushing Anna to help Clarissa. Also here, Tilly refers to herself as a friend of her sister, whereas in the novel she was a lifelong family friend of the family and knew the girls since they were little kids. But again, this had to be changed because they aged Tilly down for the show. I don't know. I found that Clarissa's reaction to Tilly here a little wooden and unbelievable. Like, I didn't really buy that she would just spout out, "Oh, Holden needs to pay." It seemed a bit fake. Plus, this leads Tilly to Tilly's death, which I think was a huge mistake for this show. So I'm going to give this a -3. So then we go back to Holden, where Miller has reappeared and he seems very sorrowful. He tells Holden that Julie told him of a story where if a child dies, an angel takes their hand and falls with them halfway. And that he tried to be the angel to Julie, but he was too scared, so Julie took his hand and he told her, "If you fall with me, it ain't gonna be for halfway." And Holden replies by saying, "It's good to see you, Miller," as he has proven to Holden that he really is Miller. Now, this didn't happen in the novels. Miller never got intimate about what happened to Julie other than saying that he doesn't want to talk about her. So I thought this was a great way to go even further than what the novels only implied, that the investigator did have Miller's feelings and emotions, and to see them play out like this in a very heartfelt and emotional scene was absolutely brilliant. Plus, it gave us a little glimpse on what happened between Miller and Julie before Eros crashed on Venus. So I'm going to give this a +5. So then the Martian Marines arrive and they all point their guns at Holden except Bobby, who tries to reason with him to give himself up. Holden says that he didn't blow up the Sun Un, and Bobby says that she believes him, but he needs to come with them now. He says that he can't and asks her to trust him. He steps towards the circuit, but all the Marines raise their weapons at him and warn him not to take another step or they'll open fire. They tell him again to come with them, but he says that he can't, and he steps towards the circuit, so all the Marines, including Bobby Draper, shoot at him. But the bullets are caught by the same purple haze that caught the ships, and the Marines all stare in awe. Then a mechanical pillar springs into action, coming alive and moves towards the Marines. Lieutenant Mayer throws a grenade at it and it explodes. Something then grabs Mayer and lifts him into the air. We then see other ships in the slow zone like Naomi's skiff and the Thomas Prince suddenly get grabbed and stopped with a purple haze. When we see Mayer next, he is hovering in the air, slowly being torn apart down to a skeletal structure until his remains are absorbed into the floor, and the others all watch in horror. So in the novels, Holden hadn't reached the records room yet when the Martians caught up to him. He was in a large open space that had structures that Holden describes as insect-like. When Holden saw the Marines coming, he knew he couldn't outrun them, so he approached them and asked if they could talk, and they responded by shooting at him, but their bullets got grabbed in the purple haze. They then ran at him, and Holden noted that they didn't need guns to kill him because with their battle suits they could just rip him limb from limb. However, when they charged at Holden, the insect-like structures came to life and charged at the Marines. They tried shooting at it, but it had the same effect as before. So one of them lobbed a grenade at it, and it stared at the grenade, not knowing what it was, until it exploded and destroyed it. The rest of the insect-like robots instantly converged on the Marine that threw the grenade and ripped him to pieces until what remained of his body was absorbed into the floor. The rest of the Marines, after seeing this, retreated. Holden was in horror at what the insect-like things did to this man, but Miller told him that he had it coming because he just got a lot of people killed, because he taught the station that slow-moving objects could still be a threat, so it adjusted the speed limit accordingly. And as I mentioned, of course, Draper wasn't with the Marines, who in the novels were much more unreasonable. They didn't try to reason with Holden as they do here. Plus, it added so much to the stakes having Draper there, and the fact that she fired on Holden was really powerful. Also, I love how the show combined this scene with the wreckage room scene. I think it really upped the stakes, so I'm going to give this a +5. So then Miller appears and tells him that it's now or never, so Holden reaches his hand and completes the circuit. We're then treated to a series of images such as seeing the important events of the proto-molecule play in reverse. Holden falling naked through an eternal abyss, blue beams of light converging and forming to form the sparrow that Miller and Julie Mao saw, the station floating in the middle of the ring shooting a beam out through a gate that carries it to a solar system that it destroys. We then see Holden in the abyss screaming. He then wakes up from this vision and collapses to the ground. So I don't want to get into too much detail here, as I want to try to avoid future spoilers, but in the novels, Holden's vision is described as him feeling like he's a galaxy-wide spanning entity, and sensing a solar system is described as kind of like flexing his fingers. He then notices that an infection starts within his body, aka the galaxy, and so something starts destroying solar systems to combat this, but the infection doesn't go away. In fact, it gets worse, where dozens of solar systems are being destroyed. But after the vision, Holden continues to talk to Miller about what he just saw until the Martians catch up with him and again take him into custody. So what's implied in both books and the show, but the show will get more into this later on, is that Holden was experiencing whatever killed the protomolecule creators, as they were destroying whole solar systems trying to combat whatever it was that killed them, but it clearly didn't work. What it proved to Holden, though, is that it would be willing to destroy an entire solar system if it perceived it as a threat. Therefore, the solar system was in danger, so they desperately needed to prove to this technology that they were not a threat. Also, the part where Miller appears to Holden and tells him it's now or never, I just realized it actually breaks the rules that Miller can only appear to Holden when no one else is there, because presumably Draper and the other Marines are still in the room. But I don't care because it was used so effectively. Now, what happened in the books in regard to Holden's vision would be really hard to translate to the visual medium, so I thought the show did an amazing job at coming up with something else that gets the same message across. It uses the visual medium to its full advantage by showing a very trippy and poetic sequence of what Holden's experiencing would be like, and I think it elevates it from the novels and it makes it more like a work of art. So I'm going to give this a +5. So my final adaptation score for Dandelion Sky is a +42. Another really high score, and this is one of my favorite episodes of the entire show. In fact, I'd say this is my favorite episode out of the material that they adapted from Baden's Gate. I thought it stayed very true to it, and in many cases it elevated the quality from the source material, as it added Bobby Draper to the story, which really added a lot. Plus they added more texture and humanity to Miller's character, which also added a lot. Plus they took full advantage of the visual medium by having a very artsy and trippy sequence which couldn't translate to the written word as well, and it also has like some of the best use of music in the entire show. So it's a really great, well done adaptation. So that's it for my book to show comparison for The Expanse Season 3 Episode 10. I'll be back in about a week for my book to show comparison for Episode 11, so be sure to keep an eye out for that. Also check out my channel as I do many more videos on The Expanse and other shows like Star Trek, Lost, and more, so be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that, and thanks a lot for watching.